So I guess we're still saying Happy New Year because it's still January. So happy 2015, and also happy Data Privacy Day. And welcome to the 12th Plenary of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. And I'm really glad that we did have so many people in the lobby area. Hopefully they'll come inside. And those of you that are able to attend in person and travel to Atlanta, given the fact that we did have yet another weather challenge associated with the plenary. This time it was the Northeast, and we did have a few people that did mention that their flights were canceled and they were unable to attend in person. But based off the numbers of people that are online, it looks like many of them were able to participate remotely. And so, as it turns out, though, this plenary is going to be testing a number of new solutions to try to help with our remote participants and with those of you in the room to engage more interactively. So there'll be more shared about that aspect of it, but this was kind of a good plenary if you had to get snowed in to be able to still be engaged. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kim Little-Sutherland, and I'm the plenary chair for the IDESG. But I want to take this time also to recognize and thank Andrew Hughes, who's our vice chair, because he was responsible for much of the planning of this plenary. So thank you so much for leading us, Andrew and Mary Ellen, and the secretariat for executing on a lot of the brainstorming and envisionings that we had. I also want to thank GTRI, John Wandelt and Steve Cross, who you'll hear from in a few minutes in the welcome. He is the EVP of Research at Georgia Tech. And so we are so honored to get to have our plenary in this facility again. Georgia Tech has become a really special place for us, and GTRI, the facility is so inviting. The support that we receive from John is top-notch, and so we just thank you for being able to return to this space. I know that a few people also are really excited that they got to eat at the Silver Skillet again, which there's a whole cult following there, I guess. And for me, since I live in Atlanta, I didn't have to travel as much, although traffic was horrible, and that's Atlanta. So this first plenary of 2015 is appropriately themed Building Towards Success, Developing the IDESG Framework. And we have spent much of 2014 working on components to develop the framework. So a little later, Peter Brown's going to give a retrospective of 2014 from the Management Council's perspective. But I'll briefly touch on a few topics that I think the framework to show why we are building towards success with the framework. First, we know that last year there was the framework development plan that was put together and really reviewed and refined with the plenary. And then we had several successful adoptions. So the first version of the functional model was approved in September, and then the approval of the standards adoption policy in December. So both of these are components of the framework. And this week we'll have our first standard that's going to be nominated for adoption into the standards registry. So all of these things are going to really help us continue with that theme of building towards success. And the efforts of the committees this week is going to be intended to give you a lot of time to work together and spend time to really continue in this effort. The Framework Management Office, which was put into place this last year also, is going to continue to help us propel down this path, and you'll hear from them too today. All of these things are later on the agenda, but I do want you to familiarize yourself with the agenda. Did everybody get a copy of it? Yes? If you don't have a copy, it is online. You can download it or look at it on the website, but we're going to spend a lot of time together today. Tomorrow, you'll spend more time broken out into those working groups with your committees in the morning and the afternoon, and then we'll reconvene again in the middle of the day so that we can hear from the INSTIC panels, INSTIC pilots, and also a Birds of the Feather session around lunchtime. So this is going to be a very productive few days. We expect everybody to work really hard during the time and then play really hard in the evening. So I also was given a reminder about the social tonight. What I was told is that the shuttle for the social will be located at the end of the driveway outside, and they'll be picking up people between 5:45 and 6 o'clock. So please make sure that you participate in the social. It should be a good way to release a little steam after a long day today. So because we started a little bit late and we have a few people that we want to speak to before our first panel starts, or when we want them to speak to you, I want to make sure that we stay on track. So I'm going to actually pass the microphone, if that's okay, to Jeremy, who'd like to share a few comments regarding the opening of this plenary as well.
Well, thanks, Kim. Happy Data Privacy Day to everybody. I can't think of a better way to spend it than being here in Atlanta with all of you, working on how to improve data privacy through a vibrant identity ecosystem. I want to say thanks also to everybody who's both here in person and virtual. I know the blizzard made things a little challenging for some folks this week, for taking the time and for making the investment to be part of this week's meeting of the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group. I know most of you are making a great effort, in some cases a sacrifice, to carve out time for this steering group meeting, and we really do appreciate it. I want to especially thank the folks at Georgia Tech Research Institute for their willingness to host us again. We were here about a year ago, had a great time, and it really is a pleasure to be back in Atlanta again. Had my first Southern breakfast in a year at the Silver Skillet this morning, and it was satisfying. It's really nice, I think, also being here. You know, as many of you know, IDESG is a not-for-profit entity. Depends on the willingness of organizations like GTRI to step up and help host events in order to keep the costs down for the organization, thus freeing up steering group dollars to support programmatic activities. So it's really great to have sponsors to support these meetings like GTRI. We welcome more of them going forward. As we kick this meeting off, I'm really excited. I'm excited in large part because I'm seeing the Identity Ecosystem Steering Group continue to evolve and mature as an organization, and I'm continuing to make progress toward creation of a framework that can serve as a foundation for the kind of vibrant identity ecosystem that was envisioned in the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. For those of you who are new to the organization or don't have the full history now that we've been around about 2.5 years, I wanted to take a little bit of time today to discuss it because there's been some changes that we've been through the last few months that are really quite significant. In some cases, they've changed the dynamic of the organization. So version 1, as I'll call it, of IDESG was launched about 2.5 years ago at an event in Chicago. As most of you know, this group did not exist prior to this first meeting. It was created as a brand new organization with help of a federal grant and a lot of your volunteer efforts, expressly to support a number of objectives that were specifically called for in the President's presidentially signed NSTIC. It's an important point, by the way. The only reason this organization was created, and the only reason it's still funded by the government today, to be a bit blunt, was to support a very specific set of tasks that the President called for when he signed the NSTIC back in 2011. Those tasks being the creation of a set of policy and technical standards dubbed the Identity Ecosystem Framework that, once in place, would then enable secure, convenient, privacy-enhancing credentials to be used interoperably by all of us every place we go online. So version 1 of this organization was launched in literally the only way our lawyers in the government knew how. We gave a grant to an entity, Trusted Federal Systems, or TFS as many people know them as, that was basically charged with convening this first meeting out of thin air and providing a set of secretariat services to the organization. I highlight the role of our lawyers here because it turns out it's actually really hard legally for the government to play this sort of an active role in creating an organization like this. And it took some real creativity on their part to find a path that allowed us to make this thing happen. The general philosophy at the time back in Chicago was, let's provide the resources to gather all of the appropriate stakeholders together, and then identity awesomeness will happen, as all of you just sort out how to collaborate on creation of this great framework that will address all sorts of really hard to solve issues around identity. So, in retrospect, that was probably a bit of an optimistic assumption. Optimistic in that the set of issues we're trying to address are really hard, and optimistic in the idea that the government simply providing some resources to gather everybody together was clearly not in and of itself enough to drive material progress. The problem, or a problem I suppose, is that without a firm set of milestones for the group to be held accountable to and measure progress against, as well as the resources to achieve them, it in fact can be very hard to drive progress, particularly when you have such a diverse array of people at the table. And milestones and resources really matter. For one thing, the organization was dependent almost solely on the good efforts of volunteers to drive progress and deliver work product. And second, while our office was providing funds to a secretariat to help pull people together, there was actually no way our office could possibly hold that secretariat, or anybody else for that matter, accountable for the results of the organization and how those dollars were spent. So the steering group was a bit of an autonomous collective. Lots of well-intentioned people volunteering, but we learned that there were some struggles in the ability to actually get stuff done in a quick manner. So 2.5 years since we first convened in Chicago, a lot's changed, and I think for the better. Rather than being an unincorporated entity with many decisions on day-to-day administration being led by a firm that's just a secretariat, IDESG now has incorporated as a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation that's governed by a board of directors comprised of representatives that all of you elected, meaning that their authority to govern derives from a mandate from the masses. The government has in turn shifted our grant dollars from funding a secretariat to funding the nonprofit corporation itself, and with that made clear that we expect the board to step up and actively manage IDESG's use of these dollars and its activities with a focus on achieving some specific results. So that's a pretty significant change, that the board is now accountable not only to those who elected them, but also for how these dollars are spent. And it's empowered to take action to manage the organization to ensure that the steering group delivers the things that its officers signed up to in the grant that we awarded last summer. Now, a big part of this new grant is really focused on helping address this challenge. The board now has a pool of resources that they manage to support not just secretariat services, but also other professional services that are needed to actually advance the creation of the identity ecosystem framework. So today, we are on the verge of announcing a brand new full-time executive director. And Peter, Kim, are we allowed to announce that at this point? All right, Peter's going to do it. But a person, to be named very shortly, we're still getting a couple I's dotted and T's crossed, I think, who we're really thrilled to have joining the organization this week. IDESG also has a number of other professional staff that support the organization as well through both the communications function and a new framework management office. I also want to take a moment, as we're talking about a new full-time executive director coming on, to also thank Mary Ellen Condon, who has served quite fantastically these last few months. Mary Ellen, I can't see, are you back here? In an interim position, and a really tricky interim position to step into, because a lot of when she came in was a time when we were actually focused, or the steering group was focused on getting the new grants in place and getting a lot of these new mechanisms set up. So we hope she'll continue to stay involved with us. And I just want to take a moment to give her a round of applause for all of her efforts. So what these resources mean, both the Framework Management Office and the Executive Director have been specifically charged by the board with supporting the operations of this organization, and they're starting to ramp up some efforts to ensure that the organization can actually be in a position to accelerate the achievement of its objectives. I'm hopeful this is welcome news to everybody. At a time when we collectively have a lot of work to do, we now have a set of resources that has been funded to support this group in the effort. The Framework Management Office and Executive Director have been directed to work closely with the committees and all the other participants, really charged with taking all of your input and helping to translate it into a comprehensive identity ecosystem framework. And since the framework can only be approved by the plenary, they obviously have some tremendous incentive to work quite closely with the committees and ensure that everybody's input is reflected. The role of all of you, here both in the plenary as well as in the committees many of you are part of, is to continue to do the work needed to support creation of the framework. Committees are absolutely essential here. They're needed to tackle different parts of the framework that require specialized expertise and also validate that the drafts of the framework as they're emerging and we're starting to iterate on them are addressing particular requirements that are essential for the ecosystem. So this new infusion of professional staff should really help to amplify the efforts of the committees and accelerate the conversion of their work into a comprehensive identity ecosystem framework. It's taken us some time to get here, but now that we have this new structure, I'm really quite excited about the way in which it should start to change the dynamic across IDESG and accelerate the pace of progress. The future is bright. Just two other things I want to touch on before we get on with the plenary. First, I've been getting a lot of questions about the next round of NSTIC pilots. Will there be another round of NSTIC pilots? When will we see a solicitation? So I'm pleased to report we expect to release a new solicitation for another round of pilots in the next few weeks. I can't point to a firm date yet. We've got the draft percolating through the last few rounds of clearance with our lawyers, but I can say we fully intend to fund another round of new NSTIC pilots in 2015. And I'm also thrilled that a number of our existing pilots will be briefing you tomorrow on what they're doing in their exercises. The lessons that are coming out of these pilots, I think both in terms of what works in the marketplace and sometimes what we're learning in terms of what doesn't, have really been invaluable, particularly given the ability of the steering group to take some of these lessons and incorporate them into the work on the framework. At times we can certainly get stuck on some of these tough theoretical questions that are out there. There's no better way to slice through a lot of them than by looking at what's happening when something's actually being deployed in the real world. Second, for those who missed it, President Obama back in October issued an executive order 13681 that requires all government agencies by the spring of 2016 to ensure that any digital service, which is sharing personal data with the public, requires the use of multi-factor authentication bound to an effective identity proofing process. The guidance on how this will specifically be implemented is still in the works at the White House, and so I can't get into details, in part because I don't know them, because I'm not at the White House. But I can say at a high level, in terms of what we see happening, it's a very significant development. There's a new recognition across government agencies that identity can serve as the great enabler. When you know who someone is, it unlocks the ability to deliver a whole new range of high-value digital services to the public. So I'm really excited about the kinds of new government digital services you'll see over the next couple years, in part supported by this executive order, as well as the new Connect.gov government-wide shared service for identity solutions that's being stood up to support it. So with that, we've got a lot of work to do over the next few days. Before I get off the stage, I'm happy to take any questions. Not seeing any hands here. Is there anybody online who has a question? I know there's some of you online. All right, seeing nothing, I will now hand off to, who are we bringing up next? I don't have the agenda. And I forget his name. Steve Cross from Georgia Tech. Thank you. Yes, we met.
Good, Jeremy.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. I have a couple functions here briefly to do. First of all is to welcome you to the Georgia Institute of Technology and the Georgia Tech Research Institute, both to those of you who are here physically and about 900 people I understand that are joining us virtually. We're just delighted to host this 12th plenary session. I also wanted to publicly thank Jeremy. My understanding, and I served in government for a number of years, taking a very kind of abstract concept in 2011 and helped making something of substance out of this. What we're doing here today, you're to be applauded for this, and the pilots that you're funded, we're very pleased to have one of those we're doing here at GTRI that we get to share with you tomorrow on issues of interoperability and trust and the scalability surrounding all of that. I have a public service announcement that's very important to make, and that's that the Silver Skillet is not open in the evening. So many of you that had breakfast there may be glad to know that. We do have many Waffle Houses and Chick-fil-A's here in the Atlanta area, but besides that, we have great restaurants, and any of the people here from G2I can share any of the restaurants within walking distance of the hotels you're at, and I hope you have a chance to enjoy that. A little bit of an outsider to this community, although my background is in computer science, and probably the best 5 years of my career was when I was at DARPA in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was such a transformational time. So I wanted to share a couple stories I saw from that I think really impact your work here this week. And there's probably two summary words for that. One is speed, and the other is anticipation. So in 1989, just 25 years ago last year was the 25th anniversary of the first indictment for a malicious virus attack from a graduate student at Cornell. One of the things we did at DARPA is we stood up the first computer emergency response team at Carnegie Mellon University to help, in a public-private partnership, deal with the proliferation of attacks. And one could say that's kind of a losing battle. It's kind of a losing battle to react. It's more important to anticipate. Everything has changed so quickly. It was 15 years ago this Saturday that we had the first distributed denial of service attack that brought down a lot of the server farms out west, that we were only then beginning to realize how dependent we were on. So we have probably one of the world's most insecure infrastructures we're dependent on. It was basically designed as a test bed for research and became the DARPANet. And then Al Gore, who was accused of bragging about the fact he invented the internet, really did, because as a young congressman, he was advocating that it be changed from a MILNet, a DARPANet, to an internet. It was back in '92 when I was still in government service, so we had panels like this that were brainstorming, trying to brainstorm how would e-commerce be supported on the internet? How would health be done in the future of the internet? It's kind of interesting to look back at some of those scenarios now and how naive they were. But that was a time when Mosaic was first introduced, and Netscape came out about 2 years later. So the speed of change has just been phenomenal, continues to accelerate, and the need to anticipate some of these changes and build the middleware and the services on top of a very fragile infrastructure is really critical, so we can support e-commerce, the changes in healthcare, everything else that's going on. So I applaud the work you're doing. I think one of the important things of a public-private partnership like this is that we can share and we have a venue and anticipate what the future might bring, because just reacting to the change isn't going to cut it. We're going to have to anticipate it. This is a special plea for universities that are involved in this partnership, because they're the bastions of the digital natives, and it's the young folks who grew up with this technology that are probably in a best position to anticipate what some of the changes are. So by sharing together, we can hopefully make this a productive environment that we can continue to support commerce with the trust that we need. And I encourage you all, and I'm just glad you're all participating in that. Those that are in the leadership position, Peter, who I met recently, and everyone else who's in the leadership position of this, I thank you for your efforts, and I welcome you here. I'm assuming everybody else is a member of this group, but if not, I hope that you will be by the end of the meeting. Easy to apply over the website. And again, I thank you on behalf of the Georgia Tech Research Institute. Just a couple comments about what GTRI is. It's very unique in that it's basically an industry research lab that's embedded inside a major research university. It was created in 1934. It works alongside our 6 colleges and our state of Georgia economic development function that has offices around the state and does extension services and manufacturing and engineering for the state of Georgia, and a very vibrant IT and telecommunications industry base here in Atlanta that we work very closely with. And people like John Weindelt, one of the things we are very proud of here at GTRI is that we view ourselves as an important convener of an intellectual crossroads, if you will, where industry and government and university can come together to share ideas and to build roadmaps and to talk about what's good for the public good for the future. So this is right in our DNA to sponsor events like this, and I'm just delighted that you chose again to come here. I hope you'll come here for the 13th and the 14th and the 15th plenary meetings as well. So again, I welcome you here. Anything we can do to help make this a successful meeting, just ask any of us and we'll be delighted to help. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Kim so we can get started with the real part of the program now. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you continue donating space, we'll keep coming back.
Great. Pleasure.
Thank you. So we actually are ready to kind of get moving now on our agenda. 5 minutes? Okay, so I'll get to do a little song and dance for you first. But the next thing on the agenda is going to be an interesting perspective. We have the media perspectives, and we have 2 individuals that will be on a panel to share a little bit about covering some big stories. So we're going to just kind of delay a bit. And I want to make sure, actually, while we take this minute, Andrew, could you come up and talk for just a second about some of the technologies that we might be using throughout the next few days? That way it won't be so foreign to everybody as you start learning about new approaches. And we'll just take a few minutes to do that.
Thanks, Kim. Everyone hear me okay? So over the course of the last year or two, we've had an ongoing request to have more interaction in our meetings, more feedback from our audiences, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. So later today, we're going to try a tool out. It's called LiveSift, and it's an audience response tool, web-based. We'll provide you with the URLs and the meeting codes necessary, and we're going to have a vote, a selection. Well, it's not actually a vote, because we would have to announce that in advance, of course. It's a really interesting tool. You'll have a choice, A or B. I'm not going to reveal what the choice is about just yet. And we'll see a graphic on screen to see how the audience opinion shifts as we talk about the subject. Tomorrow morning, during the Framework Management Office session on the cross-committee requirements, we'll be using LiveSift again, this time in question and answer mode. So in addition to the chat and the ability to stand up in the room and ask questions and on the phone, the LiveSift tool will allow you, using your devices in the room and also remotely, to frame up questions, post them into a queue that the moderators will be able to select from and display on screen. So it's another audience feedback tool. I'll stress that it's experimental for us to use the tool, so there may be glitches, but it's pretty simple and straightforward to use. So we're hoping it goes well. So that's, I see our panelists are starting to come in now. Did I dance well enough for you?
You dance very well. Thank you. So there will be, just to summarize all of this, many ways for you to be able to communicate these next few days. I very much still would love the people that are in the room to please feel free when you have a question to, stand up, come to a mic, talk, show your face. Don't feel like you have to do everything just remotely, but you will have multiple ways to be able to pose questions.